It began with suitcases that didn't feel right. Too heavy for holiday clothes. Too neat in the stitching. At Birmingham Airport, officers were already watching. They had been told something was coming. A flight from Cancun. A family who looked like everyone else. Ordinary, relaxed, blending in with the crowd. Inside those bags was something no scanner should miss. False compartments. Blocks pressed tight, wrapped clean, hidden powder worth millions. What looked like souvenirs was a shipment for Britain's streets.
The National Crime Agency, NCA, uncovered that Couriers exploited her own children to smuggle millions of pounds worth of cocaine into the United Kingdom.
Among the passengers was a mother, 50 years old, with her children beside her. To travellers nearby, nothing seemed unusual, but as Border Force moved in, gloves went on, voices raised, and the illusion of a holiday collapsed. This was not just another seizure. It was a family caught together, a mother leading her own children into a smuggling chain. The detail that shocked investigators most was the involvement of her own children. A mother, her sons, her daughters, all pulled into the plan. By afternoon, news of the bust had spread. Border Force and the National Crime Agency confirmed the interception. In Birmingham, the story travelled fast. A woman from their own community was accused of turning her family into couriers. At the airport, paperwork began. Names, ages, and addresses were recorded. Photographs were taken, fingerprints pressed into the system. The suitcases were stacked against the wall, still covered in airport dust. Behind the forms and processing, the scale of the operation was becoming clear. This was not a lone smuggler. It was an organized route. And for investigators, one fact cut deeper than the rest. A mother had set the course for her own children. Couriers was kept apart from her children. Officers booked them one by one. The interviews were scheduled for the following day. Each would have to answer questions about the journey, the luggage, and their role. The airport seizure was more than the capture of white powder. It was the breakdown of a family under the pressure of law enforcement. The scene left no doubt. A shipment had been stopped. A family had been exposed. Farzana Couriers was not a name known to the wider public before her arrest. She lived in Oldham, Greater Manchester. Friends and neighbours described her as quiet. She did not draw attention to herself. Her life looked ordinary from the outside. Couriers was a mother of several children. Some were adults, while others were still dependent on her. She was seen as the head of her household. People in her community often viewed her as responsible and family-oriented. What they did not know was the scale of the risk she was taking behind closed doors. Investigators later learned that Couriers' children were deeply involved in the conspiracy. One of her daughters, also a mother herself, played a role in the operation. 2 sons were linked to the journey that ended at Birmingham Airport. A younger daughter was also identified in the case. The entire family structure had been pulled into corruption. Couriers' age made the case unusual. At 50, she was not the typical face of smuggling operations. Police had seen young couriers tempted with cash or pressured into risk. But Couriers stood apart. She was experienced in life, old enough to understand the consequences. Still, she chose to bring her children into the plan. The case exposed the ripple effect inside families when misconduct becomes normalized. Instead of shielding her children, Couriers directed them. The choices she made left little room for innocence in her household. Each child, in different ways, became part of the chain that transported goodies into the UK. During interviews, officers noted the difference in roles between family members. Some were tasked with carrying luggage. Others were responsible for coordination. The way they divided responsibilities showed planning. It was not a spontaneous act. It was deliberate. Oldham itself became a point of interest for investigators. The town has faced challenges with illegal activity before, but the involvement of a mother and children shocked local residents. Community leaders later said the story, unsettled families who wondered how something like this could happen in a household they thought was typical. Details about Couriers' personal finances also raised questions. She had not lived a lifestyle that clearly displayed wealth, but there were signs of financial strain. Large sums of cash were not openly visible, but investigators suspected she may have been motivated by debt or the promise of financial gain. The decision to traffic the substances was not random. It pointed to desperation or influence from others higher up the chain. Her children's involvement was also influenced by trust. They followed her direction, believing in the plan. To them, she was not just a mother, but a figure of authority. This trust made it easier for her to pull them into decisions that would later ruin their futures. Prosecutors would later argue that Causa's position in her family carried weight. She had the power to set the direction for her children. Instead of guiding them towards stability, she encouraged risk. The role of a parent in this case became central. It was not only a story about goodies, but about betrayal of responsibility. The investigation revealed that Causa and her children had made more than one journey abroad. The Mexico route had become familiar to them. Cancun, in particular, was used as a key travel point. Each trip looked like a holiday on paper. In reality, it was a cover for moving substances. Those details emerged later, but at the time of the arrest, neighbors were stunned. People who had known the family for years spoke of disbelief. They remembered seeing the children in local schools. They remembered Causa shopping in town. To them, nothing suggested international smuggling. The background also showed how criminal networks exploit family bonds. A mother was less likely to be suspected than a young man traveling alone. Children with suitcases blended in with holiday crowds. Families looked ordinary in airports. This disguise worked until the operation at Birmingham Airport exposed the truth. Causa's role extended beyond carrying substances. Intelligence showed she was involved in planning. She arranged travel. She made contact with people abroad. She coordinated who would be on each trip. Her children did not act independently. They acted under her direction. This made the case stronger for prosecutors. It was not a matter of young adults straying into corruption on their own. It was about leadership within a family. It was about a mother setting the tone for her children's choices. The choices made inside their home in Oldham led directly to the arrest in Birmingham. The family bond that once meant support became a weapon in delinquency. For investigators, the background gave clarity. The stash in the suitcases was one part of the story. The family history was another. Together, they showed how corruption can begin in ordinary homes, with ordinary people, before reaching airports and international routes. By the time the case reached court, prosecutors made sure the background of Farzana Causa was clear. She was not vulnerable. She was not misled. She was a mother who knew what she was doing and brought her children into the plan. That was the most damaging fact of all. The plan was not created overnight. Detectives later confirmed that the illegal runs began months before the arrest at Birmingham Airport. Each journey followed a pattern. Flights were booked from Manchester or London. The destination was Cancun, a city known for its beach resorts. But the real purpose was not tourism. The trips were arranged to collect consignments of white powder. Authorities traced at least 2 earlier flights involving Causa's family. Those trips raised no suspicion at the time. Suitcases passed through checks without issue. The family blended in with holidaymakers. The operation depended on this normal appearance. The product was concealed in the luggage lining. Skilled packers abroad had inserted the substances in layers that were difficult to detect. Customs scanners sometimes missed them. This gave the network confidence. Each successful trip reinforced their belief they could keep going. Intelligence later showed that the family had links to contacts in Mexico. These contacts provided the suitcases and coordinated handovers. The goodies were prepared before the flights back to the UK. Once the couriers landed, the plan was simple. Hand over the cases to local distributors and collect payment. Farzana Causa's role in these early stages was central. Investigators found travel records in her name. She was not only supervising but also traveling herself. Her presence gave legitimacy to the trips. With children alongside her, the family looked like tourists returning from holiday. What exposed the network was not one single mistake but a series of observations. Border officers in Birmingham began to notice patterns. The same family members were traveling repeatedly to the same destination within a short space of time. This raised questions. Families usually did not make multiple long-haul trips in a matter of months. Suspicion grew stronger when one suitcase felt unusually heavy during a random check. Officers decided to open it. Inside, they discovered packages hidden under false compartments. Field tests confirmed it was white powder. The weight totaled several kilograms. The seizure was significant. This was the first concrete evidence against the family. From that point, surveillance intensified. Police began to map out who was traveling, who was collecting luggage, and who was waiting outside airports. Investigators from the NCA worked alongside Border Force officers. They traced the journeys carefully. Phone records were examined. Travel agencies were contacted for booking information. The scale of the activity became clearer. It was not a single attempt, but a structured operation. In Mexico, intelligence partners identified the source networks. These groups specialized in smuggling substances from South America through Central America before it reached Europe. Families like Couriers were used as couriers because they attracted less suspicion than single male travelers. The breakthrough came with the seizure in Birmingham. Once the substances were found, investigators built a wider case. They pulled in CCTV from the airport. They matched faces with flight manifests. They reviewed phone data from the passengers arrested. Each step pointed back to Couriers and her household. The stash discovered in the luggage carried a street value of more than £14 million. This figure shocked the public when it was released. It showed the seriousness of the case. It also underlined the risk Couriers had exposed her children to. Court files later revealed that the family made multiple attempts to adjust their methods. On one trip, they tried to spread the load across several bags. On another, they traveled with younger children to avoid questioning. None of these adjustments helped once Border Force had them under observation. As the investigation grew, officers learned that Couriers coordinated not just her children's journeys but also the movement of luggage after arrival. Suitcases were meant to be collected at baggage claim and then driven quickly out of the airport. The plan relied on speed. If customs intervened, everything collapsed. That collapse finally came on the day of the Birmingham seizure. The substances were too large to conceal indefinitely. Once the packages were pulled from the lining, the evidence was undeniable. Officers arrested the couriers immediately. Interrogations began within hours. While some family members stayed silent, others gave partial statements. They mentioned instructions given by older relatives. These statements directed police attention back to Oldham. Search warrants followed. At Couriers' address, officers seized travel documents, cash and mobile phones. The phones contained messages about flights and meeting points. Some messages included coded terms, but investigators were able to match them with actual trips. The NCA described the case as a clear example of an organized family operation. They emphasized that it was not casual or opportunistic. It was structured. It involved planning across multiple countries. It placed family members in positions of risk for financial gain. By this stage, prosecutors had enough evidence to charge Farzana Couriers directly. They had proof of her travel. They had testimony about her role. They had records linking her to Mexico. The investigation that started with a heavy suitcase ended with a full-scale conspiracy charge. For the public, the revelation was disturbing. News reports focused on the fact that a mother had overseen the smuggling attempts. The idea that children were used for such dangerous work caused outrage. Community leaders in Oldham spoke out. The start of the corruption and the way police uncovered it showed a chain reaction. A risky plan that worked at first eventually failed. Careful observation, repeated travel, and one suspicious suitcase combined to end the scheme. The moment the product was found at Birmingham Airport marked the turning point. From then on, the family's involvement was no longer hidden. The arrests happened quickly once the product was discovered. Border officers moved the detained couriers into secure rooms at Birmingham Airport. Their passports and tickets were taken. Questioning began immediately. Each of them was asked about who had organized the trip. Names were demanded. The answers were inconsistent. That gave investigators reason to dig further. Farzana Couriers was not at the airport that day, but her name appeared during interviews. Officers traced phone calls made before and after the flights. The numbers belonged to her. Surveillance teams were dispatched to Oldham. Within hours, her home became a target for a planned raid. And if you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. The raid took place in the early morning. Officers entered the property with warrants. Couriers was inside with her children. She was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to import illegal substances. Her children were taken into the care of social services while the property was searched. Investigators removed phones, documents, and electronic devices. Cash was also found in the house. Couriers was taken into custody. She was booked and processed. Formal interviews were carried out at the police station. She was asked directly about her role. She denied knowledge at first. She said she had no involvement in smuggling. But investigators presented her with evidence from phones and travel records. The pressure increased. After days of questioning, she continued to deny responsibility. Prosecutors prepared to charge her regardless. The evidence was strong enough. They filed charges of conspiracy to import Class A substance. She was remanded in custody pending trial. The case was moved to Manchester Crown Court. Pre-trial hearings outlined the charges. Prosecutors described the family links and the seized stash. Defense lawyers argued that Couriers had been unfairly targeted. They said she was a mother and claimed she had no control over what others had done. The trial began with heavy media attention. Reporters gathered outside the court. The public wanted to know how an entire family had become involved in such a large operation. Community members in Oldham followed the proceedings closely. Inside the courtroom, jurors were shown evidence step by step. They saw photos of the suitcases with product hidden inside. They watched CCTV footage from the airport showing family members collecting luggage. They read transcripts of phone messages linked to Causa. Each piece of evidence added weight to the prosecution's case. Witnesses were called. Border officers described the moment the stash was discovered. They explained how the lining of the suitcase concealed the packages. Investigators from the NCA testified about the structure of the operation. They said Causa was not a minor player but a leading organizer. The defense cross-examined these witnesses. They attempted to cast doubt. They suggested others could have arranged the trips without Causa's full knowledge. They highlighted her role as a parent. But the jury continued to hear evidence that pointed directly to her decisions and coordination. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized the value of the seized stash. Prosecutors reminded the jury that what sat in those suitcases had a street value of over £14 million. They said this was proof of the scale of the misconduct. They also pointed out the risk to the children who had been used in the smuggling attempts. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense as the jury deliberated. After hours of discussion, they returned with a unanimous verdict. The verdict confirmed her role in the smuggling scheme. Sentencing took place soon after. The judge addressed Causa directly. He told her she had used her position within her family to organize and direct criminal activity. He said the use of children was especially serious. He pointed out that the product had been intended for sale across communities in the UK, causing long-term damage. The judge handed down a prison sentence of 19 years. The length reflected both the scale of the substances and the involvement of multiple family members. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read out. Causa showed little reaction when the sentence was announced. Family members in the public gallery were visibly upset. Some cried, others shook their heads. Reporters noted the scene as another sign of the human cost behind the wrongdoing. After sentencing, community leaders spoke out. They said the case showed how organized corruption could reach into ordinary households. They also said it was a warning to other families who might be tempted by quick money. Police held a press conference after the trial. They praised the work of the border force officers who first noticed the suspicious luggage. They highlighted the cooperation between agencies that brought the case to court. They also expressed concern about the growing trend of families being used in international smuggling. Detectives said the investigation had taken months of work. They said Causa's conviction sent a clear message that no one was above the law. They also said it was a reminder of how county-level communities in the UK were impacted by international supply chains. Local reactions were strong. Neighbours in Oldham expressed shock. Some said they had never suspected anything. Others said the case explained unusual travel patterns they had noticed. Parents in the community spoke about their anger at the involvement of children. The 19-year sentence marked the end of the legal process, but not the end of the damage. Families affected by white powder distribution continued to deal with its consequences. The case was added to the list of major prosecutions showing how international substances reached British streets. Farzana Causa began serving her sentence immediately. She was transferred to a secure prison. Her children were placed under care arrangements. The household that once planned flights to Mexico was now broken apart by the justice system. The trial, verdict and sentence stood as the final chapter of the investigation. For the authorities, it was a success. For the community, it was a reminder of the risks and costs tied to corruption. For Causa and her family, it meant years separated by prison walls.